An Eagle in the Snow, Part 4, Chapter 1. On the way back home from the library, book in hand, Billy passed by the newspaper stand outside the station. The newspaper boy was shouting out the headlines. "Hitler marches into Austria! Hitler invades Austria!" Billy stood there in the street, knowing for sure now that he was responsible for this, and for whatever Adolf Hitler had done or might do in the future. He could have stopped him 20 years before at the Battle of Marcoing, and he hadn't. He knew, as many others did too by now, that sooner or later Hitler would turn his attention to Britain, that it was only a matter of time. And he was right enough there, wasn't he? Ma spoke suddenly, interrupting him out of the darkness. I thought she'd been asleep again, but I was wrong. "I mean, just think of it," she went on. "If that friend of yours, that Billy Byron was his name, right? If he had pulled his trigger that day, then maybe we wouldn't be at war now, and Barney's dad wouldn't be fighting in the desert, and Dunkirk wouldn't have happened, nor the Blitz in London or Coventry. All those people dead, it's all down to him. To lousy bleeding Adolf. We'd still have our home, Grandpa would still have his beloved horse, his big black Jack. One bullet, that's all it would have taken. One bullet, and none of this would have happened, would it? This story, hope you don't mind me asking, don't want to be rude or nothing, but you sure it's true? Don't sound very likely if you ask me. You couldn't strike another match, could you? Can't seem to find my knitting needle." She was fumbling around on the seat beside me looking for it. "When is this train going to move?" she said. I could hear the matchbox opening. The stranger was trying to light one, but it just sparked and died. "No good. Must have got damp," he said. "Usually reliable, these matches are. Not to worry." But I was worried. "Here goes." He struck it again, and to my great relief the match flared and lit up. Ma found her knitting needle almost at once. It had slipped down in between the seats. I relished every moment that match lasted, and dreaded it going out. One more match left. I needed the story to stop me thinking about that. The match was already burning down fast. "Is it true, really true, all of it?" I asked him. "What happened? What happened next?" "All true enough, son. Wish it wasn't," said the stranger quietly. It was like a curse on Billy's life, hung heavy over him every moment of every day after that. He never told anyone else about it, except Christine. Everyone, all his friends at work, knew he wasn't quite himself, could tell that he was sad deep inside, that he had troubles. They knew he'd been in the war, of course, what he'd done, the things he must have seen. Some of them, most of them, had been there too, seen the same things they only wanted to forget. He shook the match out. We were deep in darkness again, a darkness that was blacker than ever. But I made up my mind then that I mustn't worry about it, just to listen to the story, lose myself in it. Billy's pals in the factory, they understood, the stranger went on, or they thought they did. Like Christine, they did their best to cheer him up, but mostly they just left him be. They knew it was best. He went off every morning to the car factory, as he had always done, did his job and came back home to Christine in the evenings, but all the time he thought of what he had done, or rather, not done. Never left his mind, not for a moment. He didn't speak any more about it, not even at home now, but kept it to himself, locked inside. As week by week, month by month, the news in Europe got worse. What would Hitler do next? Where else was he going to invade? When would it be our turn? It was all anyone talked about these days. Everyone noticed the change in Billy. He seemed to live in a world of his own, distant from his workmates and friends, and distant too, now even from Christine, unable any more to joke about his glum time as he had before. They stopped going to the pictures, hardly ever went out. He even stopped his drawing, never got out his sketchbooks, not once, which Christine knew was the worst sign of all. He loved to draw, but not any more. For Billy, every day now was glum time, and he never seemed to be able to lift himself out of it. Christine never stopped trying. She just hoped that one day he would be able to leave his sadness behind and be the man she had once known again. The man she loved, the man she knew was still inside there, who had saved her life when she was little, and who she knew had only ever done what he thought was the right thing, and was now suffering for it. And then, in September 1938 it was, a couple of years ago now, it seems like yesterday, Mr. Chamberlain, the Prime Minister then, goes off to see Mr. Hitler up in his mountain home, the Berghof they called it, at a place called Berchtesgaden in Bavarian Alps, and does his best to do a deal with him. You remember that? Well, as we all know now, and we should have known at the time, you can't hardly do a deal with the devil, can you? So our Mr. Chamberlain comes back home a few days later, smiling all over his face and waving a piece of paper, telling the world that everything was going to be just tickety-boo, that he'd sorted everything out with Mr. Hitler and that we'd all have peace in our time. Some peace we've had, right? We all wanted to believe it, of course we did, but most of us didn't, and Billy Byron certainly didn't. Well, I never believed that Mr. Chamberlain neither, said Ma vociferously. And what's more, nor did Barney's dad, nor his grandpa. If you ask me, he was soft in the head believing Hitler like he did. But Grandpa always says you can't go blaming Chamberlain any more than you can blame the poor old hen when the wicked old fox comes a-skulking around the hen house. Only way you can look after the hens is to keep out the fox, or better still, go after him and kill him. And that's what we got to do. That's what Barney's dad's doing right now. He's going after him. We'll soon sort out that foxy Mr. Hitler, won't we, Barney? Well, it's funny you should say that, the stranger went on, because all this time that's just what Billy had in mind. The more he thought about it, and he thought about it little else these days, the more he knew he had to put right what he had done wrong all those years before. Trouble was, of course, he didn't know what to do, or even if anything could be done. And always at the back of his mind there was still this last hope, that he could be wrong about this whole thing, that the Fritz soldier whose life he had spared might just have looked like Hitler and been someone else altogether. Then out of the blue comes this phone call to the manager's office at the Standard Car Factory where he works. Billy is on a tea break at the time, just sitting on his own and minding his own business when Mr. Bennett, the manager, comes looking for him. All of a fluster he is. He tells Billy he's got to come right away to the phone, now, that it's a real emergency. So off Billy goes, rushing up to the manager's office, thinking that maybe Christine's had an accident or she's ill and in hospital or something. So he's worried himself sick by the time he gets to the office and picks up the phone. He recognises the voice on the phone at once. It's someone whose voice he knows, but he can't put a face or name to it, can't work out who it is at all. "William Byron? That's you, Mr. Byron?" says the man at the other end of the line. "I'm sorry to trouble you, but I have something I have to tell you." And Billy's still trying to picture the face to go with the voice, and then the voice tells him, and he still can't quite believe it. "This is the Prime Minister here, Mr. Byron, Mr. Chamberlain. I need to speak to you about a matter of some importance." Come back tomorrow for part 4, chapter 2.